Okay, so as we've discussed, this segment is called Setting Up Your Podcast for Success. So now what I want you to do is first take in a deep breath and congratulate yourself. You are already a podcaster and you've done all of the hard work. And now it's just about a little bit of that polishing and making sure that you do all of the right things and forget all of the noise that's on the internet. A lot of people are telling people to do A or B or C or D. And more often than not, this is just clickbait. I recommend that you avoid all of this clickbait and just focus on the fundamentals to make sure that your podcast has all of their I's dotted and their T's crossed. And that's pretty much what we're doing here. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is making sure that you get your distribution set up correctly. So as you would remember, one of the previous chapters that we spoke about, when we were creating your trailer, we automatically took you through distribution within the Hubhopper ecosystem itself. So what essentially happens is when you're setting up your podcast, what we've tried to do is we tried to make this process extremely easy for you. So when you're setting up your podcast, your third step after you uploaded your trailer for the first time is that you go into the automated distribution page. And in that automated distribution page, you already have all of these different channels for consumption pre-selected. I suggested to you that you should just go ahead with all of them and then click next. And then your podcast essentially gets submitted into all of these different platforms. And then it takes about 72 hours for your podcast to showcase across your Google Podcasts and your Spotify and your JioSaavn, etc., etc. So a few of these different platforms. But there was one aspect of distribution that we didn't cover. Now, I want to stress upon how important distribution is. And the best way to do that is to actually take the word podcast and break it down. So the word podcast is a derivative of the word broadcast. So essentially, it's a medium that is hosted in one place, which is your hosting platform, Hubhopper. And then it is consumed across a multitude of different avenues. Now, as far as a podcast goes and your success metrics go, the more platforms you're being distributed into, the more potential your show has to be listened to. So you have to maximize the number of platforms that you can be distributed to. All right. So we've already done a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but there are a few things that we need you to do actually along with us, and we've set all of it up already. It's just that there's a couple of things that you now need to do to make sure that you don't have any of the platforms that are missed out. Okay. So when you open up your Hubhopper dashboard, on your left-hand sidebar, you'll click the distribution button. So since your podcast is already live, when you open up your Hubhopper dashboard, you will land up on an interface that will show your podcast and then show that it's already live. Now, when you click on the distribution tab, you will see two boxes. One is automated distribution, where Hubhopper has partnered and integrated into particular companies, and your podcast essentially goes directly into these platforms. So you don't have to do anything, you just have to click next. There are certain other platforms which exist in your second box, which is called manually distribute. So this is what I want you guys to click right now. So when you go to the manual distribution avenue, you will see a few different platforms here, and all of these different platforms are dominant listen side platforms that require 2 steps for essentially you to go live on them. And you must have your podcast available on them. I cannot stress how important this is. And the most important among these is Apple Podcasts. Not because people will necessarily consume your podcast only on Apple, but it's actually because a lot of different podcast aggregating platforms actually take shows from Apple itself. So their parent platform where they derive their shows from and their RSS is from Apple. So if you submit your podcast into Apple Podcasts, you automatically go live by default into 15, 20 others, right? So what essentially you'll have over here is you'll have 2 things that you need to do. One is you'll have to copy your RSS. Your RSS is on the distribution page itself. So you just have to click on the RSS link and it'll automatically say copy. Then you need to click on the manually distribute page. Over here, when you actually click on any one of these different links, what we've done is we've given you step-by-step detailing on how to get your podcast into each and every one of the different platforms. You can pick and choose the ones that you wish to go live on, but my suggestion is that you should go live in as many of them as possible, right? So let's take, for example, with Apple. With Apple, they bought a requirement for you to essentially go into the Apple ecosystem. So we've laid out all of this in both our resources. Plus, when you click on the link, if you, however, have any difficulty or any confusion, you can reach out to us on our support channels, or reach out to us via the community, and we'll be more than happy to suggest what you should essentially do. By submitting into Apple Podcast, your podcast will again take a little bit of time to go live. And once it goes live, a lot of different platforms that are already available here, which include Overcast, Castbox, will automatically have your podcast that will be picked up in them. So just by submitting it to Apple, you'll actually go live in a couple of these others. And the job that exists for you post this point, once your podcast goes live across all of these different avenues, is that you should add your link here. Because think about your hosting platform as the avenue where you're not just now using Hubhopper to potentially record, edit, distribute, get analytics, but also as a repository that's showcasing all of the places where your podcast is available. So you want to be able to add all of the links for all of the different platforms. So we've auto-populated a bunch of these for you. And on the manual side of things, these are essentially platforms where you just have to go to the platform once it's live and take the link and add your link right here itself. This is completely optional. It's just a suggestion from our side that you should have one avenue where you have all of your different links. Okay, so once you've essentially done this, there are a couple of other things that I'd like to note on the distribution side. So the first one is that Hubhopper actually is extremely unique in the way that we approach distribution. So we have actually taken a bunch of different platforms live with podcasts, platforms that have never had podcasts before. So when you auto-distribute through Hubhopper, you have an opportunity to reach into platforms where there is a lot less competition because there aren't podcasts present in them. The entire universe of podcasts is not present in them. So this is one very big added benefit of why people actually choose Hubhopper, because they land up into distribution channels and into destinations that on the one hand have less competition, and on the other hand have never had podcasts before. So a lot of the people that come into these platforms, they're so excited about the fact that they're getting podcasts that the uptake in these platforms is quite phenomenal. And the third thing is that if you are from an emerging market, more often than not, a lot of the consumption side platforms that you currently have available in front of you are all focused towards the West. So that's one of the major problem statements for emerging market creators, because they launch their podcasts both in an automated fashion and in a manual fashion, and their podcast goes live across all of these platforms. But because these platforms are pointed towards the West, they don't necessarily get the uptake that they're looking for. So Hubhopper actually solves that through its unique integrations. The last thing that I wanted to do from a distribution standpoint is actually go to a platform called Podchaser. Is a platform which will essentially allow you to claim your podcast. You will have to take your RSS, same format. You'll have to take your RSS, you'll have to put your RSS there, follow the process. Once again, you can refer to the resources section to see how to do this. Is extremely easy, and claim your podcast. The reasoning for this is because what Podchaser allows you to do is see your ratings across all of the different platforms. It'll allow you to see your reviews. It'll allow you to see what people are saying about specific episodes. So a lot of times, some podcasters actually begin to feel a sense of isolation going forward because they don't feel like they're getting information back from their listeners. By you submitting into Podchaser and claiming your podcast, you'll actually be able to see that two-way communication between yourself and the listener itself, and be able to see what the listener is saying about your podcast. Alternatively, what you can also do is just get listeners to write on Hubhopper's Listen Site platform. And if they write on Hubhopper's Listen Site platform, you'll get all of your comments right there itself. So that's pretty much it on the distribution side. Just reiterating to make this as easy as possible for you. you've already distributed to a bunch of different platforms. They would have gone live in 72 hours. Once you've distributed to these automated platforms, you have to come back into Hubhopper, open the distribution tab. When you open the distribution tab, copy your RSS link. Go to the manually distribution tab that exists on the right-hand side. Once you click on the manual distribution, you will see a bunch of different platforms that are there. Make sure that you distribute into each and every one of these platforms, and most importantly, distribute into Apple, because if you distribute into Apple, a lot of these different platforms will automatically pick up your podcast. Hubhopper distributes you to a bunch of exclusive platforms, and we try to do this because we are cognizant of the fact that there are creators from all across the world, and they don't benefit in too large of a manner, and it's an unfair, sort of competition, because a lot of current listen side platforms are focused towards the West. They have to compete with a smaller audience when they go to these exclusive platforms, and essentially the consumers on these platforms are extremely excited about the fact that podcasts now exist in them. And then the final thing that we want to do to create and enable two-way communication between yourself and your listener is to make sure that you claim your podcast on Podchaser. Extremely simple process to do. Once you've claimed your podcast, you'll be able to see your reviews, your ratings, and alternatively, you can also get reviews written on the Hubhopper Listen Site platform, and you'll be able to set up that two-way communication. So this is us setting up distribution and two-way communication. So I hope that covers the distribution piece. If there's any confusion, please reach out to us on the support section. We'll be more than happy to help.